I want to tell you about the morning I spent 45 minutes getting ready for my own daughter's wedding, and how by sundown I was sitting alone in my car in a parking garage, finally understanding something I'd been refusing to see for 11 years. It started with a phone call I picked up by accident, ended with a set of keys I handed back without a word. But before we get there, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I read every single one. It was a Saturday in early October. Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of fall morning where the air is cool but the sun is already warm on your face and everything smells like cut grass and somebody's dryer sheets. I was staying at the Marriott on Tryon Street because my daughter had said it would be easier for everyone if the family from out of town used the hotel block. I'd driven 11 hours from Memphis to be here. I was not out of town. I pressed my shirt in the room. A pale blue one. I'd bought it specifically for this day, stood in the men's warehouse on Poplar Avenue for 20 minutes, asking the young woman there if it was the right shade for an outdoor ceremony. She told me it was perfect. Father of the bride perfect. My phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. I didn't recognize the number at first. I picked up thinking it was the front desk. It was my son-in-law's mother, Roberta. She'd called me by mistake. I could tell because she kept talking before I said a word, speaking low and fast to someone on her end. I caught 4 sentences before she realized. He's going to want to walk her down. Theodore already asked. We just have to make sure there's room. She can't say no to her daddy on her wedding day. I set the phone down on the counter. I stood there looking at myself in the mirror, 63 years old, pressed shirt, reading glasses I hadn't put on yet, and I thought about Theodore Graves, my daughter Imani's biological father, the man I had never once seen bring her a birthday cake. Let me go back. I met Imani's mother, Cheryl, in the spring of 2003. I was 52. She was 40. She had an 8-year-old daughter with wide eyes and a serious face who sat at the kitchen table doing homework when I came for dinner the first time, and who looked up at me once, decided I was acceptable, and went back to her multiplication tables. That was Imani. Theodore Graves had been out of the picture for 2 years by then. Cheryl told me about him in pieces over the first few months, the way you describe weather that already passed. He was what people in Memphis call a good-time man, present when things were easy, missing when they required anything. He'd left when Imani was 6, moved to Atlanta, remarried within a year, paid child support inconsistently, showed up on holidays if it was convenient for his schedule, which it rarely was. Cheryl wasn't bitter about it, at least not out loud. She'd made her peace. She was focused on Imani. So was I. I won't dress it up. I chose it. I walked into that family with my eyes open, and I built something real. Imani was in 3rd grade when I started coming around. By the time she was in 5th, I was at every parent-teacher conference. I drove her to piano lessons on Tuesday evenings for 4 years until she decided she hated piano, then to track practice when she discovered she had her mother's long stride. I sat in aluminum bleachers on cold Friday afternoons cheering for a child who didn't have my last name, and I didn't count the hours. Cheryl and I got married when Imani was 10. I bought us a house in East Memphis. 3 bedrooms, a big magnolia tree in the backyard that dropped leaves like it was trying to quit the job. That house was in my name. I'd been paying on it since before I knew either of them. I paid for Imani's college applications, drove her to campus visits at Tennessee, Vanderbilt, UNC Chapel Hill. When she chose UNC, I was the one who loaded the minivan. I flew down to Chapel Hill twice a year for family weekend. I was the one she called at 11 p.m. her sophomore year when her laptop died the night before a paper was due. I drove to the nearest Best Buy, bought her a refurbished MacBook, and mailed it next day before I went to bed. Theodore sent her sneakers on her birthday. Nice ones. She always thanked him. I told myself it didn't matter. You're not doing this for the credit, I'd say to myself. You're doing it because she's yours, not by blood, but by every single morning. When Imani called to tell me she was engaged, she cried on the phone. I cried too, which I don't usually admit, but I'm admitting it now. His name was Kendall. Good man, software engineer, steady, thoughtful, Looked at my daughter like she was the solution to a problem he'd spent years trying to solve. I liked him from the first handshake. The wedding planning started almost immediately. Cheryl was in the middle of it, driving down to Charlotte every other weekend. Venue tastings, florist consultations, all of it. I wrote the first check for the deposit on the venue without being asked. $4,200. The venue was a restored farmhouse on the outskirts of Weddington. The kind of place with string lights in the trees and a barn converted into a reception hall. Beautiful. Imani had sent me the link with a message that said, "Dad, this is the one." Dad. She'd always called me that. Never qualified it. Never said step or second or bonus. Just Dad. I thought that meant something. Maybe it did. But meaning and action are different countries, and I'd been confusing the passport. The months passed. The planning continued. I wrote more checks. Catering deposit. Photographer retainer. Hotel block for out-of-town guests. Imani mentioned once that Theodore was coming. I said of course he should. She should have her whole family there. I meant it. What I didn't know. What I found out by accident on a phone call from a woman who thought she was talking to someone else was that there had been conversations. Conversations about the procession. About who would walk Imani down the aisle. I stood in that Marriott bathroom for a long time after Roberta hung up, realizing she'd called the wrong number. Then I finished getting dressed. I put on my pale blue shirt. I put on the blazer I'd bought to go with it. I took the elevator down and went to the hotel restaurant and ordered eggs I didn't eat. My phone rang 20 minutes before I needed to leave for the venue. It was Imani. Daddy. The way she said it, long and soft, the way she'd said it since she was 12. "Can we talk for a second?" I told her I was listening. Kendall's family, they made a big deal out of the procession, and Theodore, he really wanted to be included. You know how he gets when he feels left out. I didn't say anything. I was thinking, what if you both walked me down, one on each side? That way nobody's feelings get hurt. I thought about Theodore Graves. The sneakers. The inconsistent appearances. The Atlanta life he'd built while his daughter learned to read with someone else, helping her sound out the words. I thought about Imani at 13. Sitting across from me at the kitchen table, asking me to check her history essay. The way she chewed her pencil eraser when she was nervous. The way she trusted me with the drafts. You understand, right, Daddy? It would just mean so much to him. There it was, the same sentence, different voice. I said I understand, I hung up. I sat in the restaurant with cold eggs and a cup of coffee gone tepid, and I did what I've always done. I made a decision quietly. At the venue, I found Cheryl in the bridal cottage where Imani was getting ready. I asked if I could have 5 minutes. Cheryl stepped out. Imani was in her dress, the veil not yet on, pins still in her hair. She looked at me with something cautious in her eyes, beautiful, terrified, 26 years old and somehow still the 8-year-old with the serious face. I sat down across from her. "I love you," I said. "That is the starting point and also the ending point of everything I'm about to say." She nodded. Her chin was already trembling. "I've been your father for 18 years. Not because I had to be. Because I chose to be, every single morning. I drove you to piano for 4 years even though I can't carry a tune. I ate 3 years of track meat hot dogs out of a concession stand that I'm still not fully recovered from." She laughed. Short and wet. "I co-signed your first apartment lease. I stayed on the phone with you for 2 hours when that boy in your junior year broke your heart. I have been at every table you've ever needed someone to sit at." I stopped. "I'm not walking down that aisle next to Theodore Graves. That's not jealousy. That's not ego. It's just true. A man who shows up for the photographs but not for the years. I won't stand beside him like we're the same thing, because we're not the same thing." Imani's tears were moving now. She didn't try to stop them. "So here's what's going to happen," I said. "I'm going to go out there and I'm going to sit in the front row on the left, right where your mother is. And you are going to walk down that aisle on your own or with whoever you choose. And I'm going to stand up when you appear, because that's what fathers do when their daughters come into the room. I stood up. The dinner tonight. The venue deposit. The photographer. I didn't do any of that for credit. I did it because you're mine. That doesn't change today. I kissed her forehead. I walked out of the bridal cottage and found a seat in the front row. Theodore walked her down the aisle. He was wearing a gray suit, new by the look of it, and he had the smile of a man who understood this was his moment. He held her arm with the ease of someone who had never once been uncertain of his place. I stood when Imani appeared, same as I said I would. She looked at me as she passed, not at Theodore, at me, and in her eyes was the kind of thing that doesn't translate into words, a recognition, a grief, and underneath it, love. The complicated kind. The kind that knows exactly what it owes and can't quite pay it. I sat. I watched my daughter get married. I smiled when they kissed. I applauded with everyone else. I drank the champagne at the reception, and I danced once with Cheryl, who held my hand a little too tight and didn't say anything, which told me everything. Theodore gave a toast. He talked about always believing in his daughter, always being proud. The table laughed at his jokes. Imani smiled with her whole face, the way she does when she's performing happiness. She also partly feels. I gave no toast. I hadn't been asked to. Kendall's mother found me near the dessert table. "Mr. Frederick," she said, "thank you for everything you've done for Imani. Kendall talks about you all the time. He says she wouldn't be who she is without you." I thanked her. I meant it. At 9:30, I found Imani between songs on the dance floor and told her she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever watched grow up. She held on to me for a long time. Her veil was off by then, her hair starting to come loose at the edges the way hair does when a day has been long and real. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she said into my shoulder. "You're forgiven," I said. "You were always going to be forgiven." That's also what fathers do. I left the reception at 10, drove back to the Marriott, sat in the parking garage for a while with the engine off, the way you do when a building still has 4 walls but the room already feels like it's been packed up. I thought about the venue deposit, the MacBook, the 4 years of piano, the aluminum bleachers. I thought about the morning Imani called me from Chapel Hill in her sophomore year, panicked, and how I hadn't hesitated for 1 second. I thought about every choice I'd made and how I'd make them all again, because they were made for her, not for the return. But I also thought about what it does to a man, not the sacrifice itself, but the invisibility of it. The way you can give everything and still end up in the front row instead of the procession. The way you understand, right? Gets used as a key to open doors that should stay closed. I drove home to Memphis the next morning. 11 hours. I made one stop outside Cookville at a Cracker Barrel, and ate breakfast by myself at a window table watching the parking lot. 3 weeks later, Imani called. Not her mother. Not a text. A phone call. Her voice small and direct. "I've been thinking about the wedding," she said. "I've been thinking about it since I woke up the next morning." I waited. Theodore left the reception at 8. He had a flight back to Atlanta. He didn't tell me goodbye. I found out when his wife posted on Instagram. I didn't say "I told you so." I just held the phone. "I don't know how to say what I need to say," she said. "Take your time," I told her. "I've got all the time you need." She took a breath. "I've been calling you Dad my whole life, and I think I forgot what that actually meant. I forgot that it's not just a word. It's a record. It's every single thing you showed up for." She stopped. I could hear her steadying herself. "I let them put you in the front row. And I knew it was wrong before it happened. I just didn't want the conflict. I chose the easier thing, and it cost you something. And I've been awake at 3 in the morning for 3 weeks, understanding that." I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen I'd lived in for 22 years. My coffee was getting cold. "An apology isn't enough," she said. "I know that, but I don't know what enough looks like yet." Will you tell me? I looked out the window at the magnolia tree. Big, stubborn thing. Drops leaves for weeks in October and then just stands there bare and unbothered through January until something shifts and it starts over. You already started, I said. This phone call is the start. She came home for Thanksgiving that year. Both of them, she and Kendall. She brought food she'd cooked herself, a sweet potato pie from a recipe I taught her when she was 16. She set it on the counter and said, I remembered. I remembered too. The kitchen, the November light. The way she'd stood on a step stool to reach the mixer because she hadn't gotten her height yet. We ate at the table by the window. The four of us. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. Nobody cried. Nobody made a speech. We just passed food and argued about whether the Cowboys would finish the season, and I let Kendall win the argument even though he was wrong, because that's what you do with someone new in the family. After dinner, Imani and I sat on the back porch in the cold with our coats on. The magnolia was bare. The streetlights were on down the block. I had my thermos. She had her hands wrapped around a mug. Can I ask you something? She said. I said yes. Did you ever think about just not doing it? The college visits, the checks, all of it. Did you ever think about just not doing it? The college visits, the checks, all of it. Did you ever think about pulling back? I thought about it honestly. The way the question deserved. Yes, I said. A few times over the years, there were moments where I could feel myself becoming invisible. And I'd wonder if it was worth it. If anyone was keeping track. But then I'd think about who I'd be pulling back from. Not from your mother. From you. And I couldn't find a version of me that did that and still liked who he was. She nodded. The steam from her mug went up and disappeared. I think that's the difference, she said quietly. Between you and him. Not the money or the time. It's that you stayed for me. He stayed for himself. She'd gotten there herself. She didn't need me to say it. I've been thinking about that porch conversation ever since. About what it means to give without keeping score, and also about what it means to finally let someone see what you gave. Not to collect, not to shame. Just to say, this happened, it was real, I was here. Because the thing nobody tells you about being the man who stays, the stepfather, the second choice, the one who picked up a life that someone else put down, is that you will spend years making yourself smaller to fit into spaces that were designed for someone else. You'll push your chair in quietly after every meal, trying not to take up more than your share. And one morning you'll wake up and realize that making yourself smaller did not make you safer. It just made you easier to move. I'm 63 years old. I've got a thermos I take to the back porch most mornings, a magnolia tree that doesn't care what season it is, and a daughter who drove 11 hours home for Thanksgiving with a sweet potato pie and an apology she didn't have to give. I'll take it. If you've been the one holding everything together while someone else got the standing ovation, if you've been moved out of the procession of your own story, hear me say this plainly. You are not invisible just because they failed to look. You are not less than what you did just because no one said thank you loud enough. The record is the record. Nobody can sell that. Thank you for being here. Share your story in the comments. I read all of them. Subscribe to Voices of Uncle Frederick and pass this along to someone who's been carrying more than their share. I keep coming back to something small. The sweet potato pie Imani brought to Thanksgiving. She didn't have to make it. She could have stopped at a bakery, grabbed something easy and called it done. But she made it from scratch, from a recipe I taught her at the kitchen counter when she was 16, and she drove it 11 hours because she remembered. That's the thing about cause and effect that nobody really talks about. It doesn't always show up fast. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes a wedding and 3 weeks of 3 a.m. sleeplessness before the person you love finally connects what they lost to what they chose. I didn't pull back from Imani's life to punish her. I want to be clear about that. I sat in the front row and I meant every word I said in that bridal cottage. I would make every choice again. But I also stopped pretending that making myself smaller was the same as being generous. Those are two different things, and I spent too many years confusing them. Real generosity comes from a full place. What I'd been doing toward the end was giving from a place that was running low and hoping nobody noticed. That's not sustainable. That's not even honest. What Theodore showed Imani without meaning to, by posting a selfie and then disappearing before the cake was cut, was something I never could have taught her directly. She had to see it herself. She had to feel the silence of an unanswered phone from a man who'd shown up for the ceremony but not for the cost of it. That silence did more for her understanding than anything I might have said in anger at the reception. I'm grateful I didn't say anything in anger. Not because I was being noble, because I was too tired for anger. I'd already spent it all, quietly, over 18 years of showing up. There's a kind of intelligence that only comes from paying attention over time, not to what people say about themselves, but to what they actually do when it's inconvenient. I watched Theodore for 11 years. I watched how he held himself at that wedding like a man collecting what he hadn't earned. And I watched Imani watch him. She's sharp. She always has been. She just needed the moment to be undeniable enough that she couldn't talk herself out of what she was seeing. The hardest part of any of this isn't the sacrifice. It's holding yourself together through it with your character intact. Not becoming bitter, not letting the invisibility curdle into something ugly. I won't pretend I always managed that cleanly. There were nights I resented the whole arrangement. But I kept getting up. I kept driving to the track meets and signing the lease co-signers and answering the phone at 11 p.m., not because I was a saint, because I decided early on what kind of man I wanted to be, and I was going to be that man whether or not anyone was keeping score. That's what I hope Imani carries forward. Not the money, not the receipts, not even the story itself. I hope she carries forward the understanding that character is what you do when the outcome is uncertain. That wisdom is learning to read what's real instead of what's convenient, and that the strength to keep going, especially when you're invisible, especially when you're seated 5 rows back in your own life. That strength is not weakness dressed up. That is the whole thing. That is everything. The magnolia tree is already starting again. Stubborn, like I said,